After the memorial dinner for my grandmother, I opened my banking app in my car and felt every sound disappear. The balance that should have shown $68,000 showed $37.14. I refreshed the screen 3 times, then held the phone closer as if the numbers might rearrange themselves. They did not. My emergency fund, my house deposit, and 12 years of late-night savings were gone. When I walked back into my parents' house shaking, my brother-in-law Derek was still laughing beside the fireplace, wearing the gold watch my sister bragged about. I asked him one question. "Did you touch my account?" He lifted his glass, smiled, and said, "We needed it more than you," and that was when I understood this was not a mistake. My name is Claire Whitman. I am 34, single by choice, and a financial compliance investigator. To my family, I was just the quiet daughter who brought boring pies and never had dramatic news. My older sister Vanessa was the golden one, married to a man my parents called ambitious even when desperation leaked through his cologne. Derek owned a construction company that always seemed one invoice away from greatness. My parents praised his risks while calling me cold because I kept receipts, budgets, passwords. They thought caution made me small. They never realized caution was why I had survived them. Before I tell you how a stolen bank account exposed the rot under my entire family, I want you to answer this in the comments. If someone in your family drained your savings and then told you to be quiet for the sake of peace, would you forgive them, or would you file the report? Stay with this story, because in the next video on this channel, I will show you another case where a daughter was blamed for ruining a wedding after she revealed the groom's secret debt, and the pattern is almost identical. Families like mine do not fear betrayal. They fear exposure. And by the time I finished following Derek's money trail, everyone at that dinner wished I had stayed in my car and cried instead. The memorial dinner had been Vanessa's idea. Grandma Ruth had died 3 months earlier, but Vanessa said we needed one last elegant gathering to celebrate her life. Elegant, in my family, meant my mother polishing silver nobody used, my father opening wine he could not pronounce, and Derek talking too loudly about upcoming contracts that never seemed to close. I arrived early with a lemon cake because Grandma had loved lemon cake, and my mother glanced at the box as if I had brought fast food to a coronation. Vanessa floated through the kitchen in a black satin dress, accepting compliments for arranging flowers she had paid someone else to arrange. Derek clapped my shoulder and called me sensible Claire, the family safety net, in that joking tone people use when they are telling the truth too comfortably. I should have left after dessert. I almost did. But my father asked me to stay for coffee, and my mother said Vanessa had been under so much stress lately that I should try to be supportive. That was always the language they used when they wanted me to absorb someone else's consequences. Supportive meant silent, supportive meant available. Supportive meant pretending Vanessa's needs were emergencies and mine were inconveniences. While everyone moved into the living room, Derek pulled out his phone and stepped into the hallway. I remember noticing because he suddenly stopped laughing. His face changed for half a second, tight and hungry, before he saw me watching and turned the charm back on. At the time, it felt like nothing. Later, it became the first loose thread. The second thread came 20 minutes later, when my phone buzzed with a fraud alert from Northwest Federal Bank. I had been approving transfers all week for work, so the word transfer did not scare me at first. Then I saw the amount, $25,000. I opened the alert and saw 2 more pending transfers, both marked urgent, both going to a business account I did not recognize. My mouth went dry. I stepped outside to call the bank, but the signal was weak near my parents' old brick house. By the time I got through to the fraud department, the representative's voice had changed from professional to careful. "Miss Whitman," she said, "there have been multiple authorized logins from a trusted device. Do you have access to a laptop named Dell, Vanessa, 17? I had used Vanessa's old laptop once, 6 months earlier, when my own computer died during a visit. She said I could log in quickly to send a document. I remembered Derek hovering behind me, asking whether I used those complicated password managers for everything. I remembered laughing him off. I remembered typing while he stood close enough to see the reflection in the window. The bank representative asked whether I wanted to freeze the account and file a formal fraud report. I looked through the glass patio door at my family laughing under warm yellow light, and for one dangerous second, I wanted to believe there was an explanation. Then Derek looked directly at me, raised his glass again, and mouthed, "Problem?" That was the second I stopped being a daughter and became an investigator. I went back inside slowly. My mother was telling a story about Grandma's stubbornness, and everyone was smiling in the soft, fake way families smile when they are more committed to appearances than grief. I stood in the doorway until the room noticed me. Vanessa asked why I looked pale. My father told me not to hover. Derek leaned back in Grandma's old chair, one ankle over his knee, perfectly comfortable. I asked him again, calmly this time, if he had accessed my bank account. The room went quiet. Vanessa's hand tightened around her wine glass. My mother said, "Claire, not tonight." Derek sighed as if I had embarrassed him, then said, "We used what you were just sitting on. You have no children. You have no real obligations. Don't make this ugly." There it was, the family doctrine spoken out loud. My money was not mine because I did not have a husband. My labor was not real because I did not perform it in front of children. My savings were selfish because I had not distributed them to the people who spent faster than they earned. I asked Vanessa if she knew. She looked at the floor, then at our mother, then whispered that Derek had a payroll emergency, and that I always had extra. Extra. That word hit harder than the number on the screen. 12 years of discipline, missed vacations, cheap apartments, secondhand furniture, and freelance audits after midnight had been reduced to extra because my sister wanted to keep pretending her life was perfect. I pulled out my phone and said I was filing the report. That was when my family finally moved. Not toward Derek, toward me. My mother gripped my wrist and told me I was being cruel. My father stood up and said I needed to think about what criminal charges would do to Vanessa. Vanessa started crying, not because my savings were gone, but because I was refusing to protect the man who stole them. Derek's smile flickered. He said, "Be careful, Claire. Once you call fraud, you cannot control what happens next." I looked at his watch, then at my father's red face, then at my mother still holding my wrist, and I said, "Good. Because none of you should be controlling this anymore." I filed the report from my parents' living room. The bank representative confirmed the freeze, opened an investigation, and advised me to file a police report for identity theft and unauthorized access. My mother whispered selfish under her breath. My father said Grandma would be ashamed. Vanessa sobbed so loudly the neighbor's dog started barking. Derek did not speak, which told me more than any confession could have. Silence from a loud man is never peace, it is calculation. When I walked out, my mother followed me to the porch and said, "Families handle things privately." I told her thieves depend on privacy. Then I drove home with $37 in my account and a strange, clean feeling in my chest. By sunrise, the family campaign had begun. Vanessa sent 12 messages, accusing me of destroying her marriage. My father left a voicemail, saying I had humiliated him after everything he had done for me. My mother texted a photo of Grandma and wrote, "She believed in forgiveness. Derek sent nothing. That scared me more." People like Derek do not waste time pleading when they believe they can still manipulate the record. I took screenshots of every message, exported bank alerts, secured my devices, changed every password, and called my firm's legal counsel before breakfast. Then I opened a blank case file on my own computer and named it Whitman Derek Unauthorized Transfers. It felt dramatic for exactly 3 seconds. Then the evidence started arriving. The first thing I found was the receiving account. It belonged to Burke Ridge Development, one of Derek's companies, though not the company he used publicly. Burke Ridge had been created 14 months earlier and had almost no online footprint. The registered address was a mailbox inside a shipping store 30 miles away. The second thing I found was a pattern. 3 transfers from my account had been split immediately into smaller payments. 1 to a credit card, 1 to a material supplier, 1 to a luxury vehicle lease, and 1 to a private school account under Vanessa's children's names. That was the part that made me sit back. Derek had not stolen because of one emergency. He had created a pipeline. Keep watching, because this is where most victims make the mistake that protects the criminal. They stop after proving the first theft. They cry, beg, negotiate, and let the family turn the crime into a misunderstanding. I did the opposite. I treated my own life like an audit, cold and complete. If you missed the previous Betrayed Stories episode about the aunt who stole an inheritance check and called it a loan, watch it after this one, because the same rule applies there too. Never argue with a thief about morality while the documents are still talking. Documents do not get tired. Documents do not cry. Documents do not care who is the favorite child. By noon, I knew Derek had accessed my account, using stored credentials from Vanessa's laptop. By 2, I knew he had attempted a credit application using my social security number. By 4, I had found a rejected loan inquiry attached to an email address that used my name with one extra letter. That was not panic. That was planning. I forwarded everything to the bank investigator and filed the police report online, then requested a case number. When I sent the case number to the family group chat, nobody responded for 11 minutes. Then my father wrote, "You have gone too far." I replied, "No, Derek did." Vanessa sent a voice message screaming that I was choosing money over blood. I saved it as evidence. The next morning, Derek finally called. His voice was warm, almost amused. He said we should talk like adults before strangers got involved. I reminded him strangers were already involved because he had used my bank account like a personal credit line. He laughed once and said, "You cannot prove intent." That sentence told me he had spoken to a lawyer or a desperate friend pretending to be one. I said, "Intent is easier to prove when someone creates a shadow company, splits transfers, and applies for credit using a modified email address." The line went quiet, then his voice dropped. "You really want to do this?" I answered, "Derek, I do this for a living." For the first time since I had known him, Derek had no comeback. I could hear him breathing. Then he said Vanessa would never forgive me. I told him forgiveness was no longer on my list of objectives. He called me bitter, lonely, jealous, and finally dangerous. That last word made me smile, because it meant he had stopped seeing me as the family spare tire and started seeing me as a threat. After the call, I sent the recording, legal in my state with one-party consent, to the investigator handling my case. Then I went to work and spent 9 hours tracing a vendor fraud scheme for a client, which felt almost relaxing compared with auditing my own bloodline. The investigation moved faster once identity theft entered the file. The bank confirmed the trusted device login, the transfer sequence, and the receiving account connection. The police detective assigned to the case asked whether Derek had access to my personal information through family documents. I thought of my parents' filing cabinet, full of old tax forms, school records, and insurance papers. I thought of Derek alone in their study during Thanksgiving, supposedly taking a business call. I gave the detective everything. 2 days later, my father's tone changed. He called not to scold me, but to ask exactly what I had told authorities. That was when I knew they were scared of what else might surface. On Friday afternoon, the detective called and asked if I could come to the station. He did not give details over the phone, but his voice had the careful steadiness of someone holding a heavier file than expected. When I arrived, he showed me a list of accounts linked to Burke Ridge Development. Mine was not the only one. There were transfers from 2 elderly clients of Derek's construction company, a small church renovation fund, and a business line of credit opened under a subcontractor's name. My stolen savings were not the beginning. They were the mistake that exposed the machine. Derek had been patching one hole by stealing from another, and my report had pulled the whole wall down. I wish I could say I felt triumphant. I did not. I felt cold. There is a special grief in realizing your family did not merely choose the wrong side in one argument. They had been living beside a predator and praising him because his lies made them feel successful. The detective asked whether I had any reason to believe Vanessa knew. I remembered her looking at the floor. I remembered the private school payment. I remembered her telling me Derek did what he had to do. I said, "I believe she knew enough to stay quiet." The detective nodded and wrote it down. That pen scratch sounded louder than any scream at the dinner. That night, Vanessa came to my apartment alone. No makeup, no satin dress, no performance. For a moment, she looked like the sister who used to climb into my bed during thunderstorms. She said Derek had told her he only borrowed from me because a client payment was late. She said she did not know about the others. She said if he went to prison, her children would lose their father. I asked if my future mattered when he emptied my account. She cried harder and said, "You can rebuild. That was the final answer. Not "I'm sorry," not "he was wrong," just "you can rebuild." Some people see your strength as permission to wound you again. The arrest happened the following Tuesday at my parents' house. They had called a family meeting, which was their favorite tool for turning accountability into group pressure. I went because the detective knew and advised me not to engage beyond necessary statements. My parents sat stiffly on the sofa. Vanessa held Derek's hand. Derek looked pale but still tried to smile. My father began with a speech about unity, forgiveness, and not letting outsiders define us. I listened until he said we should solve this privately and present a united front. Then there was a knock at the door. Not polite, not uncertain. 3 hard knocks that made every face turn. 2 officers and the detective stepped inside. Derek stood so quickly his chair scraped the floor. Vanessa said, "What is happening?" My mother whispered my name, like I had personally summoned judgment into her living room. The detective asked Derek Whitman to turn around and place his hands behind his back. My father shouted that there had been a misunderstanding. Derek looked at me then, really looked, and for once there was no smirk, no charm, no borrowed confidence. Just fear. As they read the charges, identity theft, bank fraud, wire fraud, and exploitation of vulnerable clients, my mother covered her mouth. The family portrait over the fireplace seemed to watch itself burn. The months that followed were ugly. Derek's company collapsed. More victims came forward. Ridge Development turned out to be a shell he used to move stolen funds between debts, appearances, and emergencies he had created himself. Vanessa was not charged for the theft from my account, but investigators found messages proving she knew he had used money that was not his. My parents sold investments to help her with legal bills and living expenses. They did not offer to help me restore what I had lost. The bank returned most of my savings after the fraud determination, and my credit was locked before the fake applications could mature. Financially, I survived. Emotionally, I stopped volunteering for a family that called survival selfish. The trial did not last long. Derek accepted a plea after prosecutors added the elderly clients and church fund to the case. He stood in court wearing a cheap suit instead of linen, his wrists bare without the gold watch. When he apologized to the court, to his children, to his investors, to everyone except me. That was fine. I no longer needed his apology to validate the theft. Restitution was ordered. Prison time followed. Vanessa cried into a tissue while my mother rubbed her back. My father stared straight ahead. I sat on the other side of the aisle, alone, and for the first time in my life, alone did not feel like abandoned. It felt like free. I moved 6 months later. Not far, just far enough that nobody could appear at my door with soup, guilt, or emergency requests disguised as love. I bought a smaller house than I had originally planned, but every dollar in it was clean and every lock belonged to me. I kept Grandma's lemon cake recipe framed in the kitchen because she was complicated, but she had taught me one useful thing. When something is rotten, sweetness does not save it. You cut it out. I still work financial investigations. I still keep receipts. I still believe in family, but not the kind that demands silence from the wounded and comfort for the thief. So if your family ever calls you selfish for protecting yourself, listen closely to what they are really saying. They are saying your boundaries interrupt their benefits. They are saying your pain is acceptable as long as it keeps the room quiet. They are saying loyalty means becoming the place where everyone hides their sins. Do not believe them. A report did not destroy my family. It revealed who had been stealing from it, lying to it, and feeding on it. If this story hit something personal, leave a comment with the word boundary, then watch the next Betrayed Stories episode on screen, because sometimes the person asking you to keep the peace is the one who started the war.